Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Storage Design and Modeling Stakeholder Call on the topics of outage management, SOC management, and capacity awards. The issue paper and straw proposal on outage management, nonlinearity, and SOC clarification was posted to the initiative page on March 27th. My name is Yelena Kopolov-Alford, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'm going to be facilitating the web conference today. I'm joined by Sergio Duenas-Melendez, Storage Sector Manager and Market Policy Development, and Dinesh Dasgupta, Policy Developer. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that these materials are available on the Storage Design and Modeling Initiative page. You can get to that page by going to kaiso.com, navigating to the Stakeholder Center tab at the top, selecting Policy Initiatives, and that'll take you to our main initiative landing page. And from that page, you can either do a search for this initiative or scroll down, and the latest documents will be at the top of the Storage Design and Modeling page. Okay, we have a few housekeeping reminders before we get started. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives. Please keep your comments professional and respectful. Please try to be brief and refrain from repeating what's already been said so we can manage our time efficiently this morning. To raise your hand, make sure you open the participant and chat panels from the bottom right of WebEx. And the raise hand icon is nestled in at the bottom of the participant panel in this version. And if you dialed in outside of the WebEx and you used your phone, you can press *3 to get into our question queue. And please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comments. If you would like to send a question or comment in the chat, you can send that to all panelists. We can read that out for you. If you're having any issues, technical assistance, you can get help from our event producer. You can send a chat to Intellor Events, and today's event producer is Silent. So our agenda for today, after this, I'm going to be handing it over to Sergio for the overview that reached the issue paper and straw proposal, and then we're going to go over the topics listed in this order from outage management, the representation of nonlinearity, SOC clarification, and then we're going to have an open discussion. And then we're going to take a 5-minute break at 11, and then we're going to come back to the overview, SOC management, and capacity awards with Dinesh, and then have another open discussion there. So from here, I'm going to hand it over to Sergio.
Thank you very much, Elena, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time on Friday morning and for your patience. We know that there's been some changes in the schedule, some changes in how we planned to discuss this paper and get your feedback. But we're happy that now a couple weeks later we're able to be with you and go over these materials. So this first couple slides, they're just trying to set the stage, set the context for the conversation today, and hopefully we have a productive chat on the paper that was posted and where are the next steps for these topics. So we posted this paper late March, focusing on outage management enhancements, nonlinearity, SOC clarification. We, as noted in the paper, focused on this subset of issues given the consensus that we saw in the initial working group meeting, the comments submitted to urgently address some of the known issues that storage resources face. I do want to note that some stakeholders did advocate for prioritizing other matters, mainly BCR reform. But we saw a strong desire to address known operational challenges and then to continue leveraging the working group format to have a common understanding of more complex discussions that are needed to have to advance the topics of BCR and default energy bids. So we see the value, in leveraging the meetings we've been having for topics and issues where perhaps more in-depth, holistic discussions are needed, and we want to continue to do so. At the same time, we do not want to stop progress on matters where there seems to be alignment and where some of the changes or modifications that we might pursue are a little bit more tailored, surgical, as in the topics included in the paper. So that's the spirit of the paper. As you all know, we haven't had a public discussion of the paper since it was posted, given the changes in the timeline of the initiative. Those changes were really obeying some, pressing priorities that other initiatives and efforts, popped up, and we wanted to offer stakeholders adequate time to engage in those as well, so as to not to not overload the stakeholder calendar. We made those modifications. I think we heard back a bit of a mixed reaction on having done that. Some stakeholders being grateful that they had a little bit more time to process what was posted, both in this initiative and others, and other stakeholders, sharing that they were excited to start working and discussing this paper, and asking us to continue being deliberate in moving forward. So I want you to know that we take that feedback to heart. The goal in the context of this meeting will be to go over the paper, discuss what's been put out there, listen to your feedback, and offer any clarification to questions that might be out there. And then we'll have, of course, an opportunity for you to submit written comments on the paper and this meeting, and that will inform future evolution of the paper as well. So, as I mentioned, we categorize the different topics that we're trying to engage in this initiative in different groups so as to enable parallel development, and we will have I'll show an updated timeline given the changes that happened after the publication of the paper. So these are the topic groups. The ones in the green boxes show what we'll be talking about today. Originally, we wanted to focus really on the paper for this meeting, but following some feedback from stakeholders after a call held April 14th on our proposed modification to better reflect capacity awards on our SOC management formulas, we decided to also include this topic in today's agenda. So we'll be going over the paper first, and then we'll be providing an overview of our proposed modification to the state of charge formula to incorporate the impacts of the flexible ramp-up product. We'll talk about some of the testing and some of the insights we've developed from that, and we'll also note and address some of the feedback and questions we've been hearing. The purpose of this conversation today on this topic will be to inform the discussions, the policy discussions moving forward on this subject, and to allow for an opportunity for stakeholders to be plugged in and to be able to share their perspectives and ask questions. As noted in notice sent out last week, there is an opportunity to comment on this subject of SOC management and capacity awards. That there's two opportunities. One through the BPM process that's related to the specific modification proposed. The other one through our regular stakeholder commenting tool within our landing page of the initiative. That to inform future policy discussions and inform kind of the way to work through these topics moving forward beyond the summer. So we hope that you leverage those options and that the conversation today serves to provide additional insights on the modification proposed and what we'll do in next steps. And ideally, we'll continue this conversation on future policy moving forward. Yes. So I also just wanted to show you an updated timeline. The timeline that was included in the paper still stands. No, the only changes are the ones shown here, italicized and underscored. First, the inclusion of that opportunity to comment on by May 13th on the state of charge management and capacity awards topic, as I mentioned. The second change is that the comments on the issue paper and straw proposal that we'll discuss today will now be due the 23rd of May. We've pushed that a little bit back because the call was pushed back. And the third change is, again, the discussion paper on distribution level and parent resources topics. It's been pushed back slightly to the 26th. Beyond that, the rest of the schedule, as presented in the paper, remains. And in terms of the next steps for the topic that we will, the topics that we will cover today on outage management and what was included in the paper, the next stage will be to discuss today, get comments from you by the 23rd, and then end of June, we'll have a new version of the paper that ideally, if we have, the support of the stakeholders and we can address their questions and comments, will put us really close to kind of moving forward on these topics, either in an implementation direction via the BPM changes for those that are BPM changes, or working with our internal groups for systems modifications. So please refer to the timeline on the paper, just noting that there's this little 3 changes. Those are the 3 ones. Everything else still stands as of now. So that, I'll pause here to see if there's any questions or comments before we get into the substantive matters of the paper.
I'm not seeing any hands or any questions in the chat. If you're not seeing the raise hand icon, it is not at the bottom of the panel on this version of WebEx. You'll have to open the participant panel, and it's at the bottom of that on the right-hand side. All right, back to you, Sergio.
Yeah, I think not seeing others, so let's keep going then. Great. So first, let's start with outage management enhancements. This is the first section of the paper. Clearly, as we discussed there, I just saw a hand come up, so maybe let's pause here. Alba, please go ahead.
It probably is just my WebEx, but the slides have not advanced during the entire portion of what you just presented, or at least I didn't see them advance. I was able to go through this. I was able to go through the slides on the download, but so I know where you are, but I'm not sure if they're advancing. Okay. If they're advancing for others, then it might just be my problem.
Oh, thank you for flagging that, Alba. I think, Sergio, if you want presenting rates, or say next slide, and then
I've been advancing them myself. So yes, if I can have the presenting right, that would be great. Sorry about that, everyone. I thought I was moving it too.
No worries.
So now we should be in the slide that says outage management enhancements. Are we there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, and my apologies. Hopefully that whole section was not hard to follow despite that, but thank you for flagging that. Okay, so let's go into this section of the outage management enhancements. this is the first piece that we are dissecting within the issue paper straw proposal. And the goal of it really is to focus on areas that require some evolution as the penetration of storage resources has increased in our footprint, mainly regarding the Outage Management Business Practice Manual, the BPM, and our outage management system. What we found and we've heard from stakeholders is that there are areas that necessitate, new characteristics, new functionalities to properly integrate the specifics of energy storage resources. So here we're discussing some of the modifications that were put forth by stakeholders and trying to define what would be the best way to integrate them and move forward on these topics. So what were some of the inputs that we got? First, I think both DMM, PG&E, also Terra-Gen actually, they all called for revising outage types and limitations to be covered in OMS that are unique to storage resources. DMM mentioned state of charge limitations and negative PMIN. In addition to that, Terra-Gen noted the max energy, mean energy D rates that are necessary to model energy storage availability. In conjunction to that, I think PG&E also noted that nonlinearity should be of the highest priority, and we'll talk about that in a subsequent section. But what we really want to note is that, there was a broad support to address this expeditiously, and knowing that these items might be, less interconnected to other topics and also might be less prone to controversy, we agreed that it would be viable, amenable to try to seek some quick resolution of this concerns. In addition to those comments, we actually got very detailed feedback by Vistra on three key modifications that could be done regarding outage management. The first one would be a BPM modification, so as to clearly state that there is a requirement for outage reporting for all capability attributes for storage resources, and also specifying the reporting thresholds for not only PMAX, but also state of charge, so as to mirror the tariff thresholds that are included there for other non-storage resources. So in this context, Vistra recommended a language like I've included here, that there would be a requirement to report changes exceeding 10 megawatts or 40 megawatt hours or 5% of registered values lasting 15 minutes or longer within 60 minutes of discovery. This is a modification that was discussed, I think, actually in two of the meetings that we held prior. Since the paper was posted, I had the opportunity to connect with some of the stakeholders in this call, and I think that there might be some interest in continuing to pursue this inclusion with some edits. Edits focused perhaps on the megawatt hour value in particular. Here it is listed as 40, and you'll find it the same in the paper. That is a value that is really assuming 4-hour duration of the asset. So perhaps a more general language there would be helpful, so as to not presume what the duration is and make that this language is adequate and suitable for storage of different durations, a means of really future-proofing this modification. And another area where I think a bit of additional discussion might be important for some stakeholders has to do with the timing of when these changes will need to be represented or reported, particularly in the context of remote operation. So for stakeholders that are interested in this modification and that have feedback on how to enhance or further modify it, I invite you to chime in later on when we pause for comments or questions, and also through your written comments. A second modification that was proposed by Vistra was to add cost descriptions to the nature of work table that is included in the outage management BPM. So today, the outage management BPM includes a table that defines nature of work, the different nature of work categories, and includes some examples that might be readily applicable to conventional thermal assets. Now, importantly, there are some conditions that might affect storage resources that are not included in that table. So the requests from Vistra would be to include, namely, inverter, rack outages, safety management outages, control system failures, and electrical component or transformer failures as examples of issues that storage resources might face and that would fall under the planned troubled nature of work. This would give additional guidance and clarity to existing and new SCs operating storage so that we have, level playing field on how things are being reported, and we understand operationally what outages mean and how to convey them. In addition, in this very request, Vistra also requested that we allow for the use of the technical limitations not in market model nature of work to convey the impacts of fallback or nonlinearity. This is a topic that is discussed separately in the nonlinearity section. So for now, when I refer to including examples or causes to the nature of work table, please know that I'm referring to everything except the nonlinearity or fallback issue. That will be discussed separately. So this was the second recommendation that we explore in the paper. The third one from Vistra was very much aligned with what I described before from PG&E, DMM, Terragen, and it's basically to have an IT project to enhance OMS by allowing, really by upgrading, enhancing it so that it can meet all of the sub-bullets included here, allowing automatic acceptance of upgrades to forced outage cards, supporting overlapping outage cards that can adjust the different characteristics listed here, allowing no-null values in addition to null for other cards. A very important one, creating a single out-of-service checkbox for NGRs, allowing for PMD rates on test energy cards during new resource implementation, and retaining outage card values during extensions. These are all modifications that we've discussed in prior meetings, and I would, note that these are modifications that are, generally in line with the challenges we've observed as well, and that have been noted in other efforts too. So it's not really brand new, let's say. and we, generally understand how this will be quite important for resources and also for the ISO to be able to incorporate this adequately. Now, what are our next steps so far? Probably before I go there, I'll pause here to see if there's any clarifying questions on what was recommended by stakeholders, or if there's any addition or feedback, correction, detail that people want to raise before we go into what the paper proposes as next steps for these matters. So let's see if there's any hands.
There's no hands in the queue and no questions in the chat.
Okay, so then let's get going. So, okay, what does the STRAW proposal see as the next steps? Well, we definitely agree with the need to align OMS with storage-specific outage types and characteristics. In the paper, we mentioned that it would be valuable to, at this point, focus on these 4 critical components. Supporting of overlapping outage cards, allow for the non-values in addition to null, create the single out-of-service checkbox for NGRs, and allowing for PMIN re-rates in the sorry in the test cards during new resource implementation. There are 2 elements here that were not included from the prior slide. The first one is the automatic exception, automatically accepting updates, or basically updates to force outage cards. So this one we did not include as one of the first 4 to pursue, because the internal thinking so far that this would be a medium heavy to heavy lift. Why would that be the case? Really, it's because it's probable that in how the system consumes the nature of works, that it would require potentially a new nature of work that would be specific to storage resources and that would be flagged to be automatically approved. That nature of work would allow us to differentiate between these outage requests that are modeled for NGRs that may not need automatic approval versus the ones that do need automatic approval. Now, if we were to pursue this, it's likely that we need to pursue this ahead of doing some other modifications, such as allowing for the overlapping cards. That is also a very heavy lift. But if we do the automatic update first, then we need to rework the overlapping cards on top of that. So basically, it's really a matter of timing in a way as well, how to manage the complexity of the project. So basically what I'm trying to convey is we do not, we're not trying to disregard this recommendation or request and note that is not something we'd like to pursue, but would like to note that given the effort that it might take and the importance of other requests in the same category, we might want to prioritize other requests and then turn our attention to the automatic exception of updates to forced outages. The other value, the other element that is not included in this list of 4 is the retention of existing values when having an extension or an updated outage card. This really is not included, not because it cannot be done or it would be overly complex, but it is very much a subset of supporting overlapping outage cards. If we allow for the support of overlapping outage cards that adjust all of these different values, that will in itself resolve the matter of being able to retain existing values. So let's say that issue is actually a subset or it's subordinate to the first sub-bullet here. So this is kind of the proposal at this time. I wanted also, based on some recent conversations this week with some folks that might be on the call, I wanted to give you an idea of how much of of a lift these different modifications might be. All of this really require some level of effort that will impact our OMS system materially. Perhaps the ones that are the fairly low hanging fruits, so to speak, are really the second and third bullets. The other two fall more in the medium to heavy lift modifications. So I want to share that, not so much to give you a notion of how we might rank or prioritize them, but more so to inform your own comments and perspectives, both here and in your written comments, right? Particularly the first item here, I think is the one that is of the most importance for stakeholders given their comments. This is definitely, of all of them, the one that would be the most material to pursue, and we agree that it is needed. So that's why we want to focus on that work in addition to others that are a little bit more manageable as we move forward. Okay, now on the BPM clarification on outage reporting for all capability attributes. In general, the ISO agrees that making this clarification would be valuable and would enhance operational clarity both for SEs and us. So we welcome the recommendation, and we think that if we were to modify this, it would be within section 4.1 of the outage management BPM, and we could address that through a dedicated BPM process. Before we move in that direction, though, of course, we want to have this meeting. We want to see your written comments, and in particular, we'd really appreciate your feedback on where the two instances or asterisks I noted before, and I'll show that screen again to remind you. And it's this 40 megawatt hour value where, we might want to revise that language from Vistra's initial proposal so as to reflect that there might be different durations. And also, we'd love to get your perspective, your feedback on the timing of this requirement, particularly when under remote operation. From the ISO's perspective, it is essential to keep timelines, guidelines that are similar, that are coherent and with each other. But we have heard that this might be additionally, complex or onerous if there is a remote operation being done. So if you are have any perspective or comments on that, we'd love to hear that through your written comments, and that will inform how we move forward on this item, whether to keep discussing it here or move towards a modification of the BPM as suggested in the paper. The final element here is regarding the inclusion of outage types for as different reasons or examples for applicable nature of work within the table on the outage management BPM. we agree that this is something that can be added for clarity. The only exception here being the inclusion or discussion on how to write up or describe rack outages, particularly because they might have a voltage imbalance interplay, as well as the discussion on whether we should use the technical limitations not in market model nature of work to represent fallback. That is an issue that we're trying to scope out of this section so that it's its own discussion on the nonlinearity piece. So I'll pause here to see if there's any questions, comments, feedback on this section of the paper.
Yeah, let's go to Alva.
Hi, Sergio, this question might actually be more for Kathleen if she were on the call, but is the rack outage issue, is that the issue of sort of strings being out of balance? Is that the type of curtailment that we're talking about there?
I don't believe Kathleen is in the call, but if I may answer from my perspective, is that the rack outage issue could be under rack outages, having strings being out of balance would fall under a rack outage. So that how we word that, I think, will be something that we might want to discuss a little bit more through their comments, and also include a bit more detail in the next round of the paper before we move it over to the VPM process, where, you know, in the VPM process, we're really just trying to have a solution already generally understood and agreed upon and include that language. So that is a subset probably of all rack outages, strings being out of balance, yes.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a pretty important type of issue, both in terms of being able to, it is something that needs to be dealt with in a expeditious way, and the way of dealing with it is well known, that this would be sort of included under that heading of the other types of nature of work curtailments. But that's why I was interested in getting a little bit more information about it. I mean, it's something that that requires potentially the battery to be taken out of normal market operations for some period in order to be able to restore it to balance.
Yes, no, we agree with that. I think in part of rack outages too, my understanding is that there is a level of imbalance that may be able to be addressed without having the whole facility be on outage. Then there's, you know, the ultimate, let's say, level of imbalance where you need to get that consequence, as you mentioned. So I think this is an area where storage owners, operators, SCs would be really valuable to get some of your perspective through here and your written comments as well. Because our intention really is, you know, particularly with these modifications that are really about adding more clarifying language within the VPMs, our intention is to move quickly so that we have the clarity needed for you all.
I agree with you, and I hope there'll be others weighing in on that with better information. Thank you.
I'm not seeing other hands, but actually my VM just showed me this sign of network connection lost. So maybe if people can move the slides for me, I can keep going while I reboot this, or I'm sorry for this technical difficulty. Can you all hear me still though?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can move the slides for you, and there's no other hands or any chat questions at the moment. Yeah, so if you say next slide, we can move it.
Yes. The problem is if I say next slide, I won't be able to see it since this is, I'm very sorry. Can we have like 1 minute of a break while I rebuild this? That would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. I think I'm back, so we can keep going. So let's go on to the
So your
nonlinearity.
video is really odd. Oh, there you go. You're back. Okay. Sorry about that. We can still hear you. We can see you now.
Perfect. Sorry. VM sometimes I love it, and sometimes it does this kind of things. So representation of nonlinearity. I expect that this is an area where we'll have a bit more of a discussion. As we discussed in our meetings prior, nonlinearity is really a physical reality, a physical characteristic of storage resources, particularly lithium-ion batteries, really. And it shows up as an increase in the internal resistance of the asset at very low and high state of charge levels. Its consequence really is that it limits dispatch capability. So for example, a resource nearing full that usually would be able to inject 100 megawatts might only be able to inject 50 megawatts, and a resource that is almost empty might be usually able to charge at 100 megawatts, may only be able to charge at 50 megawatts. So in general, this is an issue that stakeholders are well aware of, and we know that there's hasn't been unified guidance on its representation or its communication. So there will be a need to have a plan for how to represent this in the market. So we discussed 4 alternatives in the meetings and in the paper. The alternatives here are included with a bit of notes on the comments we saw from stakeholders. First alternative, I think pretty straightforward, is let's use an outage card, but let's all agree on which outage card to use. The importance on having agreement there, initially I think it was very much informed by some discussions around UCAP, both at the PUC and at the ISO. Since we posted this paper, there's been some evolution in those discussions, and I think that those concerns might be a bit less top of mind now, but we still obviously would want clear guidance on what card to use. A recommendation that was made, as I alluded to before, from Vistra was to use the technical limitations not in market model nature of work. Importantly, as we'll discuss later, that nature of work is RAIN exempt. Second option was to integrate this in the master file as a new set of characteristics for storage resources. So, we have Pmin, Pmax, let's just, and other characteristics, obviously. Let's create 2 new fields and call it a charge current rate and discharge current rate. And that basically would tell us what is the relationship at different state of charge between that and the Pmin, Pmax. This is a bit more of more robust, longer-term solution, perhaps, and it would add more a clarity on the capability information of each resource. But importantly, these current rates are very much defined by the design of assets. So this would be resource-specific, most likely resource-specific value, which makes its development a little bit more complex, or maybe, if not complex, at least it would require a bit more time. The other two alternatives were first to extend the use of the dynamic limit tool. That basically is a tool that exists today for hybrid resources, and the recommendation would be to allow storage resources to submit their real-time limits, just as hybrid resources can do. This was supported by some stakeholders, Terragen, CISA, Vistra, as a potential option, but it was also described with some concern by the Department of Market Monitoring, noting that the conditions of storage resources are quite different than those of hybrid resources. For storage assets, we have visibility into the resource. For hybrid resources, on the other hand, we really are not seeing really any of the underlying components as much as we're seeing the aggregate potential of them. The last option is definitely perhaps the most robust, but also the one that would need the most discussion and time. And it is, let's move towards a biddable state of charge paradigm, where resources are bidding in terms of their state of charge rather than their capacity. Now, this would allow for a more accurate reflection of what storage can do, but of course, this will require much more discussion in this venue, as well as more time in the implementation. So we've included that in the paper as, we know that this is, we believe that this is the long-term state where we want to end up in, right? Where we have this other participation pathway that mitigates, or at least, resolve some of this and other issues, and we see it as an ultimate solution in a way, but given the need for near-term guidance and relief, it's probably not the one that we'll take right now. So in the paper, we discuss that. Oh, maybe I'll pause here because I see a hand. Go ahead, Alba.
Yeah, going back to those four options, I had a question on option 2 and a comment on option 3. So option 2, master file integration. I wanted to actually understand, either from yourself or those who've proposed it, whether this is intended as just information for the operators, or because it can't actually be incorporated into the market model at this point, at least in my understanding. So I was curious about the value of this without some form of market model change, and if it is sufficient, and if your perspective is this is a better way to keep this information visible to the operators, and that's fine, but I'm not sure that it actually captures the operational concerns of the market participants on that.
Yeah, I think that it would be a two-step or a twofold process, where first, it definitely would allow for us to have more clarity, more information, and it would also allow us to, if we see something occurring with a given asset, be able to confirm, look at the data, and better understand what is going on based on the parameters in the master file. So that would be probably the first phase. The second one would be to create those linkages so that it can inform or be reflected, be included in downstream processes as part of what the market is looking at in solving. Now, that also conveys, the fact that if we first would need to discuss how to develop the metric, how to ensure that it's resource specific so that it is, accurate, fair, and then go in the next stage of the process to make sure that it is actually communicating with the other systems. That puts this solution as, pretty durable. I will not contest that, but definitely very involved, right? It will require more time and effort. Whereas looking at the outage cards, it makes it harder to be able to properly discriminate how each outage that is being conveyed as related to fallback effects. How do we kind of prove or expose to verify that if we don't have other information about how fallback affects this given unit? But in the near term, it solves that issue in the operation of conveying to the market that unavailability. So hopefully that helps a bit the question. Yeah.
And my understanding is
others.
my understanding is the outage card could be used right now in the market processes, just limiting the Pmax essentially with Pmin. So I see that as quite practical. I think the second option should be expanded either by yourself or those who suggest it in terms of what they think the ultimate use of this data is. But I'd like to see that, as you say, in my mind, there's an involved modeling change that's ultimately being asked for that isn't being described fully there. So I also wanted to comment on the third option, which is to say that I'm somewhat in disagreement with the DMM on the concern about opacity here, because the dynamic limit tool can be audited both for hybrids and for batteries, because the information that's required to determine whether the dynamic limit was set within some bounds of reality are available in both cases, because the actual telemetered state of charge of the battery is a requirement in both cases. And so it seems to me that there may be concerns about how it would get used in at particular moments, but since it can be monitored and the DMM has the ability to say after the fact somebody has been abusing that, I would agree that that's possible if nobody's looking at the correlation between the dynamic limit and the actual physical telemetry that you're getting. But given that data is available, I see that as, there should be, in fact, automated ways of determining whether that tool is being used in a way that goes outside of some bounds of like what, obviously there's issues of accuracy and people anticipating what's going to happen in the system that doesn't pan out. But in general, when you're putting in limits with a 5-minute horizon, it's going to be very easy to tell whether something is being put in purely for strategic reasons or whether it corresponds to actual limits on the state of charge of the battery.
Thank you for the comment, Alva. I would not want to speak for DMM on a response there. I do invite both you and DMM to maybe note some of these challenges in their comments as well. The only thing I'd add, though, is that, I think part of why the dynamic limit tool was created it really was trying to solve an issue of a potential lack of visibility into the underlying elements of a hybrid resource. And that challenge is not necessarily present for storage assets. So I think the source of the concern as well is, well, we don't have the same conditions that have drove the ISO to develop this for hybrid resources. We have the visibility on the assets. So maybe having a tool like this that might impact the immediate availability of resources is that it could be used in that manner. And while you note that could be identified ex post, that would also create a burden of now having to identify it ex post. So not trying to speak for the MM here, just trying to share what I understood from that discussion in prior comments.
Right, and I mean, I think it's. I would counter that the whole issue of nonlinearity is an issue of visibility, and so I think it could be an appropriate mechanism. I'm not really necessarily advocating for it because I don't know what all the issues would be around it, but I do think it's one possible way of making it easy to dynamically limit the capacity when a battery is about to hit or is in a nonlinear current limit state as has been described.
Thanks for the comment, Ala. I appreciate that perspective. I think we have Chris as well.
Hi there. Can you hear me all right?
Yes. And maybe I just realized, just as a reminder, please everyone introduce yourselves. I know we are a small group here sometimes, but for the purpose of the recording, it's always very useful.
Of course. Yeah, this is Chris Devin, representing TerraGen. So I just wanted to chime in on this part of the conversation, just to lend an additional voice in support of what Alva was saying. And, some of my experience working on the dynamic limit concept, agreed with the way that you, portrayed the reasons for why we developed that, Sergio. I think that was the case. I think that some of the things that Alva mentioned, I would support, I agree with, and I think that this option should not just be taken off the table because it might be a little bit extra work for DMM. I think there are some ability for folks to use this in a way that could be potentially questionable, but I do think that the history of the use of this has shown that folks are trying to use it conservatively and that they are generally good actors, and I think that it can be used in a more dynamic manner, or I should say, rather than say dynamic all the time. I think the idea is that you can use this more quickly and easily, perhaps, than doing outages or outage cards, where you can get this into the market system potentially to represent the fallback issue more quickly than what it would take for the OMS to do that. So. Something to think as far as on the benefit side there with this one. So just some thoughts, and then I have some other additional thoughts about the issue on fallback and like what outage card, the whole issue that we're going to get into. I think more about use of outage card and how that could be viewed for rain purposes and those sort of things. So I'll hold my comments for that part of the discussion, but I just wanted to chime in and just, add an additional bit of support there for what Alva was saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, and that's exactly the next part of the slides here, going into what outage card to use, and some of the discussion we saw there in comments. Before we go there, I see Adam raise his hand. Adam?
Hi, this is Adam Swadler from the Department of Market Monitoring. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the use of the dynamic limit. So I would agree with Alva that, yes, we do have data to monitor, VER forecast that are associated with hybrid resources and the telemetered state of charge for storage components associated with hybrid resources. One question, though, if the idea of extending the dynamic limit for storage resources to reflect nonlinearities were to be adopted, I would be curious to hear from stakeholders what data could be provided that would allow DMM to have that similar type of visibility into the usage of a hybrid dynamic limit to manage nonlinearities. So obviously that's a more complicated concept than just looking at state of charge or a VER forecast. It's, I mean, the whole discussion here is around how it's something that's not, represented in the model and may not be visible. So I'm curious if this were to be adopted, what data could be provided that would allow adequate monitoring of this use of the dynamic limit? Thanks.
I think Alva lowered and then raised his hand again. Is that a new hand, Alva?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond just with one simple potential proposal would be that the DMM would be able to use telemetry and this master file value as prima facie evidence that the dynamic limit tool was required, or that it was a legitimate use of the dynamic limit tool after the fact. So looking at the state of charge of the battery and whether that was within that range defined by the master file would immediately identify that as a use of the dynamic limit tool that was appropriate.
So I guess what I'm hearing would be a combination perhaps of option 2 and 3, where
Right.
we use option 3 for the purpose of, let's say, representing this in the market, and we're using option 2, the master file parameters, for verification ex post.
Right, and this is also presuming that you've answered your question that you had asked about how do you ascertain that that's a legitimate value. I'm sure there's technological, documentation that would be required in any case, and I think it's pretty well available too for that. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alva. I would just say, again, it's an ongoing discussion here, but as a general matter, relying on monitoring and potential enforcement actions in lieu of a more robust market design, I don't think is the preferred route, not just because of a workload per se on DMM, but just in terms of ensuring efficient market outcomes and competitive market behavior. So again, I know it's an ongoing discussion here, but I would caution against developing an approach that says, oh, we can do this, just because DMM can monitor it. I mean, there are things that that's sort of the necessary way to go, but I think to the extent that it could be more accurately represented in the market model versus relying on ongoing monitoring and potential enforcement actions, that would be the preferred way to go. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Adam. And by the way, I'm from PG&E, Sergio, and I think your DMM support for biddable SOC modeling is ultimately the right direction, perhaps, but it is a long-term direction. It's probably multiple years in the future before we get to that correct market modeling, which I think should be the objective of this whole initiative. Really, is to get a correct, a model that is compatible to both market participants and the ISO that allows batteries to be used in the most efficient and most reliable way possible.
Yeah, thank you for that back and forth, Adam. I think that's really valuable, and I generally, share that notion of when we create something and then think about continued monitoring. Let's try to limit that to instances where it's absolutely needed. If there are other options that give us additional certainty, we might want to pursue those. But I welcome this discussion both here and in comments, of course, and we'll take that feedback as we see it come through to heart as we develop. We keep working on this issue. Chris, I saw your hand up again. Do you have an additional comment?
Yeah, hey, Chris Devin, Terrigen again. I just wanted to also say I agree with Adam's thoughts about how this needs to be a durable thing that is in the market model. But again, also agree with what Alva's response was. And I think, to answer your question or the question that Adam posed, beyond just what Alva was saying is, and a little bit more support for this idea of the timeliness of the use of the dynamic limit tool. One of the benefits of why this could be a good interim solution, I think, is because of that time frame where you look and we see what happens when we put an outage for something like this, and we know we're going to get close up to the full, charge or fully depleted, and we start to, experience foldback, and then put in outages, and then it takes a little bit, and sometimes you end up having a deviation from where your DOT was, or from where you're expected to be producing or charging at because of this issue, and so that's where I think the dynamic limit tool could be potentially a good interim solution, and maybe not the full long time solution, but just something else to add there to support that thought, and part of the data, if we're looking at that and beyond just knowing if we're inside the range that's included in the master file, or generally understood to be the close to the full charge or depleted state of charge, then that could be used as well. Just to say, here's some evidence that this is happening, and the current process and potentially the proposal to just use outage cards isn't going to work as well as having it in the market model or using a dynamic limit, which can be more quickly updated. Thank you.
Thank you for that perspective, Chris. I'm trying to keep us on time. I'll move on to what was included in the paper as the potential near-term solution, because I'm sure there will be some additional discussion there. And that way we can make sure that the remaining topics have the time they need. So moving forward, okay. So in the paper, we discuss how looking at the array of options, the use of an outage card will probably be the most suitable near-term solution. Basically, using this outage cards to reflect the effects of fallback on Pmin and or Pmax as a function of its state of charge. The key concern that created or raised was, well, what nature of work should we use? In general, what we saw from stakeholders is that there was a support for using OMS in the near term, and the only recommendation we heard from stakeholders about what nature of work to use came from Vistra, and it was to use the technical limitations not in market model. Now, this is a nature of work that is exempt from the Resource Adequacy Availability Incentive Mechanism, or RAIM. So that created some discussion both internally and within the comments that we received. So currently, we saw comments come through, particularly from colleagues at the PUC's Energy Division as well. They've included some comments on it. And I think there's a general sense that a blanket exception on RAIN for fallback might not offer the incentives needed to have assets be developed and designed in a way that minimizes fallback, nor would it incentivize the contracting of these resources in a manner that ensures adequate capacity. Fallback, as we've discussed, is a known technological limitation that cannot be fully eliminated, but it can be minimized. And in general, because of this, in the paper, we've noted that at this point, we do not believe that there should be a blanket exemption on RAIM for it. So if that is the case, that really would put us in a situation where we would not want to use the technical limitation not in market model nature of work and would instead want to continue using the planned trouble nature of work. This, we thought initially, this would allow for adding, a comment or something that notes that it's related to nonlinearity or foldback, and that would allow us to, continue having RAIN for these outages and identify nonlinearity instances exposed in the case of some analysis that would be necessary for any form of accreditation work being done here or elsewhere, within the ISO or elsewhere. There's been some evolution, though, in this conversation since we posted the paper. The first point, the first area of change has been that my understanding from the CAISO's RAMPD initiative is that discussion of UCAP as it relates to what outages, what nature of works to look at and how that would inform has really changed materially, and now UCAP efforts are more so focused at the PUC, so that's one change. The second one is that the PUC has noted that probably they would look at more general outage data to work on these matters, and that puts us in a condition where using planned trouble and adding a note would not be the solution to allow for this identification of nonlinearity instances. So really the focus on why to use a nature of work versus another, I think now is not so much so around how it might impact UCAP evaluations in different venues in the future, but more so around whether a Raymond's exemption would be adequate. So in that context, I do want to note that whether this should impact generic RA, EFC, or other RA-related values or accreditations, I think is not really fully within the scope of this discussion. What we can try to address here, and we want to hear your comments, and we want to further clarify, is how this relates to RAIN so that we can have a clear plan on what nature of work to use. So when you look at the paper, when you prepare your comments and are thinking around this, please do consider that those recent updates on what's been going on in the UCAP space and how this is really much so more focused on RAIN and whether or not having a blanket exemption would have the adequate incentives for resources moving forward. Now, in the long term, we do see value in these options of integrating the new current rates as resource-specific values in the master file. And of course, we'll continue work and discussion here on a new pathway using SOC. I see two hands up, so let's go Alva and then Eric.
Alva, PG&E. Just a couple of comments. One is, if you essentially, it seems to me you're somewhat buying the idea that there needs to be a change in the market model to correctly deal with the issue of fallback. And therefore, in my mind, just in semantic terms, that Vistra's description of what is the reason for the limitation is correct. It's a limitation due to the limitations of the market model. So I think that's something that the ISO should grapple with in terms of the clarity of what it's presenting here. I think there's in a couple places in these slides, it's there's the suggestion that people have been doing certain things, different people have been doing different things based on an unclear understanding of how this would be treated. And I think some of the burden for that lack of clarity falls on CAISO. I don't think that the reform should be based on the fact that certain people have taken a more rigorous view, and others have tried to sort of interpret the requirements based on what they've seen actually in the market. And I also think that given that this is probably a short-term solution, I don't think the question of what you're incenting in terms of, I mean, you just want to be careful about saying that this is going to lead to people essentially, you know, building slack into future plans for how they run batteries. Essentially, it sounds to me that like what you would like, and if it were clear that this were the requirement, I think it would have been, you know, clear from the start, is that you'd like storage to be overbuilt in such a way that it can provide exactly the availability that the market model requires. The current market model, which is a single ramp rate going from SOC min to SOC max, enabling PMIN to PMax dispatch, except insofar as it is actually hitting the SOC limit that you've calculated. And if that were clear from the start and clear going forward as a requirement, it would probably be easier to deal with this issue. But I think one of the problems has been that this has not been, it's been left in a area of lack of clarity, where some participants are going, you know, are looking at their costs and trying to figure out the best way to satisfy the requirements as they understand them. So I don't know if I may be all over the place, but I just wanted to raise that concern with this. I don't think it's just an RA issue. I think it's the ISO's requirements on RA resources that is really kind of the issue here.
I appreciate that feedback, Al. I think this is a challenge too that has become increasingly more apparent as you know, up until 2021, really we were not seeing a lot of resources hitting consistently those like state of charge limits, right? Like the performance of the assets was quite different, and now this has become definitely more apparent, and being more having these discussions as to what we want to incent and what is the expectation, paired with potential, you know, for clarification here and in our documentation would greatly aid here. And I take your note on, you know, it is a technical limitation that is not captured on the market model is a good description of this. How that relates to whether it should be or not RAIN exempt to both of those merit further discussion. So I take that, and we'll grapple with that, as you mentioned, in the paper's subsequent evolution. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Sergio. Thank you.
Hey Sergio, hey Sergio, Eric Little, CalCCA. Can you guys hear me? I'm not sure if I'm unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you,
Eric.
Okay, thank you. The screen is not quite clear, but that's all right. So can you explain on this slide, and then I've got a question on the previous slide as well, what do you mean by allowing RAIN evaluation of resources? Do you mean that you would put this in place and then on a case-by-case basis determine whether or not you're going to charge them RAIN? Or do you mean they would always be charged RAIN, but you would evaluate whether or not that was the right answer?
No, maybe evaluation was, maybe I had it wasn't the best word to use there, but basically they would still be subject to RAIN. That might be a better way of putting it. If they use this plant trouble and nature of work, those outages still fall within what is subject to RAIN. That is a better way of putting it.
Okay. Can you go back one slide then?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, on this one, talk about it being considered in resource adequacy contracting, and I want to understand that a bit better because I think there's some problems with that. One, resource adequacy contracting generally is, hey, you have a must offer obligation to the ISO, and that's the end of it. And the buyer pays money for that. The seller takes on the risk that they have that RA must offer obligation. If what we're saying is now the seller battery storage resource has to say, well, and sometimes I'm going to get charged RA aim because of this back issue, then parties are going to have to guess as to how much that's going to happen and what the cost of it is going to be so that they're adequately compensated within the RA program. That throws a lot of difficulty and a lot of uncertainty into RA contracting. And then the third thing about it is, I think most, if not all, of the new battery storage is being built to meet IRP and MTR needs, which means it's under either life of asset or at least a 10-year contract. And really, you're talking about then going back and reopening those contracts, and no party wants to do that. I can see for new contracts you could do it, but then it still has this, parties have to guess what the value of that RA aim is going to be and whether or not it's going to get fixed in X number of years. So I think that saying it should be considered within resource adequacy contracting is making that much more simple than it actually is.
Yeah, I take that. Understand, Eric. I think that we're not really trying to say reopen the contract and deal with that there, but more so, if fallback is a non-technological limitation and company A designs an asset that experiences fallback in the extreme 20%, no, the top 20 and bottom 20, and then company B designs the asset in a way that it's limited to just the upper and lower 10%. In the efforts of LSEA to get whatever storage is valuable to them, they should consider that. They should evaluate that when contracting. That's really what we're trying to say, not so much go back to reopen contracts and ding them for it, but we want to have incentives so that companies A and B can say my assets actually, is, let's say, a superior good than an asset that does not experience fallback as much, for example. So that's what we're trying to convey here, not so much redo the contracting. But I do take the note that places an added burden on the buyer on basically reviewing what in their minds might be substitute goods, but by their design, there might not be perfect substitutes. Does that clarify a little bit what we're trying to convey?
Yeah, that helps. I guess the other thing I would add to this, though, as far as incentives go, I think the incentive for the battery to be able to charge as quickly as it possibly can and be able to fully discharge as quickly as it possibly can is already there, right? That's what energy arbitrage is about. If it takes me 5 hours to charge for 4 hours worth of discharge, then I only have to charge in the 5 cheapest hours. If it takes me 6 hours, now I have to add something that's probably a higher price than what was there before. So there's already plenty of incentive for these resources to have as little foldback as possible. What I'm hearing is that the issue is really a technical limitation where if I charge the battery at that rate for that last portion of it, it's going to degrade the battery more quickly. That's a cost right now that's not reflected in default energy bids. If you could reflect that in a default energy bid and say, hey, I'll charge this resource faster, but the cost of doing that is really high, and therefore the price in the market that I buy at has to be really low, then okay. But if they don't have that ability to reflect it within a default energy bid to be able to show what the actual cost of charging and the actual value of discharging is, then they're kind of stuck in this situation of, I have this limitation that I can't reflect in the market. We do have other assets that have that. We have multi-stage generators that we know we can't move them between certain stages without doing certain things. There's a cost to doing those things. And I know that's your longer term solution. And maybe then the answer is the ISO needs to move as quickly as possible to that longer term solution. Earlier this week, the ISO was talking about summer readiness and the resources that they have, and I believe they said 12 gigawatts of battery storage. So this is a big problem now and is only getting larger. So if we need to address this problem in the long term, we need to turn that long term into more of a, a few months worth of discussion and implementation as quickly as possible, because the problem's not getting smaller. So Sergio, thank you. I appreciate all the information on this. It's been really quite helpful, and look forward to more discussion on it.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good to hear from you too, and we will take that to heart. We know with a incredibly fast-growing fleet of storage, the challenges are coming at us quicker, and we need to be nimble and responsive to them. Let's go with Chris and then Don. And just in the spirit of time, to allow the conversation for the upcoming topics to be robust, please, let's try to refrain from repetition. Let's go on. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Sergio. Will do. Chris, Devin, Terragen. So just wanted to also agree with Eric's points there as well. So I'll just say +1 to those and draw another bit of an analogy real quickly here. So I think of this issue where we're talking about the technical limitations versus plant trouble problem and the outage cards here. This really is a technical limitation, and so it's really unfair to apply RAIN in this situation. And the analogy I want to do, again, back to the thermals, I think Eric did a good job explaining how, like the MSG models there's certain ranges where you can't get into that, and the CAISO, doesn't use an outage card that applies RAIN in those situations to the thermals. Now, let's think about it as, for instance, the ambient D rates on a thermal unit, right? Either you should lower your NQC, or you get hit with RAIN potentially for having an ambient D rate due to temperature, and that's just an engineering feature of the unit, right? But when we're talking about this engineering feature of storage, I think it's different because we're actually able to tell you, hey, we can operate this in a certain way, but we can't operate it the same exact way all the time, which is much more like that MSG example that Eric made. And so it is really a technical limitation. We're talking about that longer-term solution. And so I second would agree, we really should try to be getting to that solution rather than saying, let's solve this by overbuilding these units and forcing ratepayers to pay more money for PPAs and sizing these things in a way where we don't get into this. We can operate these units effectively and safely all the way throughout the ranges if the market can reflect that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Don?
Don Trethway, California Energy Storage Alliance. I'll be very brief. I think the key is if we actually did model this in the market optimization, that they would not be subject to RAIN penalties. And it seems kind of odd to subject them to RAIN penalties now, where if in the future when we model them correctly, we wouldn't. So I think that's a pretty strong justification not to do this at this point.
Thank you very much for the comment, and that's a very valuable perspective to include. Well, I still see Eric's hand. Maybe it's in all hands. Okay, it just disappeared. So let's go through the next topic. That way we'll try and make up some time to ensure that the capacity awards and SOC management topic gets all the time it needs. So the last topic included in the paper had to do with clarification of state of charge. There are some background slides here that I'll go over very quickly, and just really included them to facilitate people catching up. As we noted before, SOC is always an estimate. Different assets, use different methods to calculate that value, and that value is what is conveyed to the ISO through telemetry. Now, regardless of the fact that there might be different methods, some of them even proprietary methods to calculate SOC of different assets, these estimates should reflect a good faith judgment of the unit's capability. So today, the definition that we have of state of charge in Appendix A of the tariff, it provides a lexical understanding of what state of charge is, the energy available to CAISO markets from a non-generator resource or storage device. Now, what we've noted, though, as a potential challenge is that there might be a need to further clarify what is intended with available here. And this is because there are instances where there is energy that is there, that is stored, but is potentially inaccessible at the point where the information is conveyed to the ISO. And I want to really, really stress that when we talk about inaccessible energy here, we do not by any means try to say that it is never accessible. We understand that this energy might be accessible in a different point, in a future point of time. But what we're trying to state is more so that when the values are conveyed through telemetry, that energy, although stored, might be inaccessible to the market. So what are some instances of this condition? One of them that we've discussed, voltage imbalance. This occurs when the voltage across cells or strings of cells are no longer balanced, and this basically will limit the discharge and charge capability of the asset. There's many reasons why voltage imbalance occurs, and it can be minimized. It can be via design or management. It can be attenuated, but in general, it's also a characteristic of the technology. The other instances that we've seen have been particularly at low state of charge. These are instances where we've seen resources submit outages that very significantly derate their PMAX when they have a low but non-zero state of charge, and they've received a DOT that is greater than 0 megawatts. So to put it more, more clearly, you're almost empty, and we told you to discharge, and then we see a derate of the PMAX that is very, very significant. Why would assets do this? Well, one could be nonlinearity, which is what we just discussed. The other one could be that there are significant opportunity costs associated with fully depleting the units. Now, this is an area where we have some discussion in the paper and where we continue to urge stakeholders to share their perspective and information that they might have. Because in the meetings, we've had some discussion where some stakeholders note that, yes, there is energy there that might be still stored at very low state of charge, but because lithium-ion batteries may suffer irreversible damage when discharging at or near PMAX as they approach being empty, these resources may consider that energy to be available, let's say, quote unquote, for exceptional dispatch only. In that same vein, we've heard other stakeholders note that even for exceptional dispatch, that is not the case, because that would still put them in a situation where the resource being completely out might create conditions for an outage that might last quite a long time. So because of that, they're basically these factors are leading resources to be operated as if their minimum stored energy is greater than 0, even when that is not what is indicated in the master file. So these constraints, we believe that they should be, if they're known, they should be represented to the market through the various means that we have, such as the minimum stored energy limit in the master file, and also through the needed outage cards, because if not, we're going to end up having, infeasible energy schedules that eventually, both affect the efficiency of the market itself, but also put operators in unnecessary stressful conditions. So what did we hear from stakeholders on this topic? I think there was a broad support for adding more robust language on the availability expectation, particularly for telemetered state of charge. We heard from DMM the recommendation of having consistent state of charge calculation methodology, maybe not so restrictive as to really establish a method, but at least to establish what it should consider and should take into account. That telemetry should reflect what is available at dispatch at the moment that the resource is conveying that telemetered information. We similarly heard from CPUC's ED staff that reflecting voltage imbalance would be valuable in those SOC telemetered data. And as I noted before, we heard from CISA that we may want to be careful with how we characterize inaccessible energy, and I hope that the asterisk I offered at the beginning of this section does that. We really want to say it's inaccessible at the moment the information is conveyed, not in a future interval. So what we included in the paper was to modify or expand some of the language within the direct telemetry BPM to clarify that the values conveyed for instantaneous SOC and maximum continuous energy should reflect what is accessible to the market at the time that they are communicated. So that will, further include the fact that some energy that might be stored there, if it's not accessible at that given time, it should be essentially discounted from that SOC calculation that is being conveyed through telemetry. So, for example, the effects of voltage imbalance would be reflected there. Now, we do want, at this time, we don't think that this is immediately ready to move towards that VPM process, precisely because there seems to still be some discussion within the working groups as to whether resources at very low state of charge, is that state of charge something that we should deem, quote, as people have mentioned it before, for exceptional dispatch only, or if it's really fully unavailable. So getting more information, getting more feedback from you all will be really helpful so that we can continue this discussion in the working group ahead of moving towards clarification in the VPM. Now, this is the type of change that, as we think of it, would not really imply a change on many different systems, but it's much more a clarification on the VPM. So as we get the clarity and kind of the backing of stakeholders and support needed, we can move towards that VPM process. And we would probably want to do so, perhaps following your comments, the next iteration of the paper, maybe another discussion. If we get that clarity, then we can keep moving forward. So that's the update on this piece. I'll stop here to see if there's any hands. I think I see Alva.
Hello, Sergio, this is Alva from PG&E. Just one brief thing here, which is relevant to the next section, the real-time SOC, considering flexible ramping, is that CAISO perhaps should also consider as at least in a parking lot form, the question of what they do when a resource's actual telemetry, I don't know how to put it, the portion that is in addition to what is being available to the market may exceed the maximum or be below the minimum. because the state of charge calculations are predicated on that value being accurate. And what happens now, I believe, is that when you go above the maximum continuous energy limit, that is what is used in the state of charge calculation. And so you'll get inaccurate results over the horizon of the real-time market because of that. I just think that's an issue that you should think about dealing with at some point.
Yes, thank you for that, Alba. You actually brought something up that I wanted to kind of close the conversation with. So several stakeholders have asked us before, since we did those presentations around the constraints, stakeholders have asked us to produce some form of written material of, let's call it like a knowledge article or a summary of those constraints. And then after we posted this paper too, other stakeholders have asked us to explain in a more narrative fashion kind of the data process, how the systems consume the data from telemetry through the market, through the constraints, and into the next one. So that is a work in progress, this paper. It's, as we've expanded a little bit more the discussion on the FRU-related modification that we'll discuss later, that's added more to that description. But I think that would be a good place to start, from a knowledge article perspective or something like that, to foment that education and common understanding here, and then also build upon that, particularly for the next, let's say, step in the evolution of the constraints as applicable to storage, which, as we'll discuss later, from our perspective, will likely be expanding the terms included in the envelope constraint, and then extending their use beyond just the IFM. So I take this comment to heart, and it will inform that description of the constraints that we've been working on, so that we have a clear understanding of it, and we can build off of that. I don't see any other hands right now. I'll give it another minute because we have reached the discussion part. So if there's any comments, questions on all of the slides we've presented so far, please feel free to chime in. And again, the comments, written comments on all of this, the paper and the meeting today, will be due on the 23rd. Okay, I am not seeing any, and we did have a 5-minute break scheduled before the next topic. So I will suggest that we take that 5-minute break now and reconvene, let's say 10:50, to move on to the next topic with Dinesh. Does that sound good, Milena, Dinesh?
That works for me.
Sounds good. See you in touch.
Thank you all.
Okay, great. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And as Sergio mentioned at the top, comment windows to this topic are already open. So on May 13th, both the BPM comment window and the comment window on the policy initiatives page will close. BPM comment window, which is on the BPM change management site, that is for comments related to this modification. We've already had one stakeholder provide feedback. Thank you very much for that. And comments on the policy initiative page are for for future discussions about a long-term solution for this topic. I will stop for questions after the overview of the background, then after reviewing the proposed BPM changes, testing, and then overview of the stakeholder discussion. So in order to keep this organized and structured, please let's refrain from questions or comments until those demarcated breaks. Okay, and with that, let's move into the topic. So some background that you've already seen in the last meeting, but flexible energy, energy storage provides most flexible ramping product procurement in our current market. These resources also tend to support FRU procurement across all hours of the day, right? So it's not just in peak; it's throughout the entire day, throughout all the summer months. And the current SOC formulation does not consider the impact of FRU on SOC. So what does this mean? This means that these awards may be potentially infeasible because the resource may not have the SOC to deliver if dispatched during the real-time interval. So modeling that FRU impact on SOC will ensure that FRU is deliverable from storage resources. And because a large share of FRU is currently procured from storage resources, this gap could have potentially significant implications going into the summer. So this is from our market analysis team, this is a typical summer day in the FRP market, where we've seen upwards of 60% of awarded FRP as unavailable during peak hours. This is quite a sizable amount of FRP, which is part of the reason why we have concerns going into this summer. And from a couple different lenses, right? From a price formation perspective, FRU prices could be suppressed due to artificial supply of FRU by storage resources that can't deliver on it. From a market efficiency perspective, the market may need to procure immediate additional energy resources to cover undelivered FRU awards, and this provides upward pressure on the energy bid stack, potentially increasing those real-time energy prices. From a reliability standpoint, operations may be using load conformance even more than they would have to ensure immediate ramping capability is there. Therefore, the ISO proposes modifications to the current SOC formulation ahead of summer 2025. Okay. Any questions on that background so far before we move into testing? Okay. So
let's go to Kelly Wells. Sorry, Dinesh, we got a couple hands.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, great. I have a couple slides or a couple questions on slide 40. I think it's the one with the chart. So just to confirm, these are megawatts and percentages of unavailable FRP that was awarded just to storage, or is this all resources that awarded FRP?
Guillermo, would you like to answer this question?
This is only looking at the share of FRP associated with the storage resources.
That are unavailable from storage resources.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. And then I have, I guess, one other question on this. I know you guys just recently issued the BPM change where you will be implementing the contingency constraints for nodal procurement of FRP. And I know that state of charge, unavailability due to state of charge and unavailability because you're behind a binding contingency constraint are two different reasons why storage might be unavailable to provide the FRU. But I was curious, once the contingency constraints are in the market for nodal procurement of FRU, do you guys have a sense of how much this might decrease, these numbers might decrease because you've added that? Obviously, I would expect there's some overlap there, and you might have a resource that's unavailable to provide the FRU because of both reasons.
I can take that, Danish. Yes, Kelly, that's an interesting question because just to pick in your last question, this only measures and shows an illustration of the dynamic that we are targeting specifically to storage resources. This is FRP carry and not supported by storage and resource capacity. Now, you are bringing the more general discussion of deliverability. And you're right, for the last 2 years prior to getting into this storage discussion, the main topic in FRP has been the nodal congestion and the implications that it has for deliverability of FRP. You're right, we have proposed a BPM language change to indicate that we are ready to activate the contingency-based constraints in the real-time market. As of now, for FRP assessment, we have enforced so far the flow gate-based constraints, just thermal limitations, and nomograms. We are missing to enforce the contingencies, and that is precisely the reason we have this BPM change. We have treated that to be like a normal process BPM change, and that means it's going to be effective somewhere in June, I believe towards the end of June, just in time for the summer conditions. Now, that is just process-wise some background. The point you are bringing together here is a very interesting one, because if we were to have like a holistic view of the amount, the percentage of FRP that for whatever reason is not deliverable, we may have to expand this bar plot into something else that could have maybe like a stack bar plot, right? One component would be this unavailable FRP due to insufficient SOC. There could be another bar in that stack that is going to be a congestion stranding the FRP. And maybe there'll be another bucket in that stack chart for whatever other reason we find along the way. Now, in that visualization of all the reasons, there could be more complications because, yes, there will be some cases, some resources like a storage resource that happens to have allocated FRP award. It doesn't have the sufficient state of charge, and it also happens to be behind a transmission constraint that right now we are not enforcing and therefore is stranded. So for that case, for that specific scenario that you are portraying here, the fact that we address one issue still makes now more visible the other issue of the stranded capacity because of congestion. So we are hopeful that once we tackle these two items together, there should be basically all the issues that have been identified to impact the deliverability taken care of, and yes, we are going to continue to assess how that materially works. The point I want to really emphasize here is that these are kind of different drivers and different solutions for each of the drivers. So addressing, mitigating the issue of FRP not supported by a state of charge and not being available will not necessarily eliminate the other driver of FRP getting stranded because of congestion. So we have specific issues and specific solutions for each of the two.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, and I understand there's two different drivers, and that's why you guys need two different solutions. But what I think I heard you said is once the contingency constraints are in, we could potentially see these numbers here decrease just because there is the potential for that overlap. Again, not saying that we just need one solution. I understand we need two, and there's two different drivers, but these numbers might naturally just go down once one of the solutions is put in place. Thank you. That was all I.
Thank you, Ken.
Let's go to our next hand.
Yeah, hi Dinesh, this is Alva PG&E. I just wanted you to explain the word immediately there in the slide.
In terms of the solution.
What does the word immediately mean there?
Yeah. So at this point, we have the code in place. We're ready to move towards implementation, and we are ensuring that we have a robust stakeholder discussion about it before we turn on the switch. So when we hopefully where this ends up is we take the comments from today, we take the comments for the 13th, we see how everyone is feeling, and by later this month or by early June, we're looking for delivery and turning it on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. The code is in place. You feel that the CAISO believes it's done sufficient testing, and really, if there's consensus or whatever level of agreement you feel is appropriate, then you'll move it into place at the beginning of June.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's no other hands or questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yelena. Okay, so just quickly going over this is all public now, the proposed modifications to the market operations BPM. It's under proposed revision request 1627. So there are two changes. The one that is material for this conversation is we are looking to add the clause that states that the exception that the real-time interval state of charge considers the impact of uncertainty awards in the upward direction. And there's not a tariff-defined term for flexible ramp up. It is referred to as uncertainty awards. That's why it's referred to this way in the BPM. And if you look at that second equation, it's the addition of the FRU term that's right after the open parenthesis. One other change that we are looking to make is a cleanup edit. So while we were looking and thinking about the potential change here, we noticed that the SOC lower bar and SOC upper bar should not have that AT factor in there. And so that's been changed here and also been changed in that last formula as well. Okay, any questions on that? Ooh. Okay.
Sorry, we have a hand from Alva.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
We have three hands. Yeah, we'll go to Alva first. Go ahead.
Just a quick one. This is really related to what Sergio had brought up earlier, but I think in defining those state of charge constraints, it would be very useful to know which when you're running the real-time market, where does the telemetered state of charge first get inserted into those state of charge equations? In other words, is the telemetered? I don't think it's the telemetered state of charge. Certainly not for the 15-minute market. The telemetered state of charge is not used in the state of charge constraint that actually results in a binding FRU award. It would have been inserted into the series of constraints earlier in the optimization formulation, and it would be good to know both for 15-minute market and the real-time market where the telemetered state of charge gets inserted. One of my concerns was looking at this was this idea that the flexible ramping up limitation would cascade over multiple periods, but I realized that as you're pulling in the telemetry, that will correct for essentially overestimating or over constraining the state of charge due to flexible ramping up. But I don't really know exactly where that's going to happen. It would be really helpful. I think that kind of exactitude is necessary in making this change.
Thank you, Alva. So I don't have the answer for you off the top of my head. Sergio or Guillermo, do you have an answer here? Otherwise, we'll move this question offline.
Yeah, offline is fine.
Okay.
Okay, our next hand is from Eric Little.
Hi, Eric Little from CCA, and maybe you'll get to it later, but I know we had some comments on this asking what this is designating. Is it energy? Is it capacity for the flexible ramping? It seems like it's energy, but that's not clear because you actually take ancillary services and make sure that you list them as capacity and then an attenuation factor. And then secondly, why only the flex ramp up in this equation? Why not the flex ramp down? Is it having some sort of impact on the optimization that we're not understanding? And if so, what are those impacts? And can we get all of those formulas together in one spot to understand everything that's going to happen in the market here by doing these changes? So just curious about those. It's kind of hard to read through the BPM because some of those variables are not defined. And the units are almost never defined. So it's kind of difficult to figure out what the formula is that we're looking at.
That's a great question, Eric. I'm actually going to say let's hold on to that for a second until we get to the discussion overall, and then we'll cover the ISO's perspective on those topics.
That works for me. Thank you.
Okay, we've got two more hands. We've got Callie and then Dawn. Let's go to Callie.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. My question / comments is along the same lines with Alva and kind of the initial concern with, potentially over constraining the state of charge here. So in your guys's, can you go back to the slide where you have the formula, the proposed change? Perfect, thank you. So in this formula, you guys are assuming that the full impact on a state of charge for a resource that's awarded FRU occurs in the same interval it's awarded that FRU, but in reality, it's actually ramping across two intervals. So half of that impact occurs in one interval and half of it occurs in the other. Did you guys ever consider reflecting that in this formula instead of making the assumption that it all impacts the same interval that it was awarded? Because it's slightly different than regulation, right?
Yeah. From my perspective on this, I think it would be, given the resource constraints that we have and given what we're able to do ahead of summer, it would be more challenging to put that in place. And with that in mind, sort of putting this term here is a fix that covers. But you're right, this is something that we should definitely consider in more detail moving towards a longer term solution, whether or not that this is accurately reflecting that ramping in between period between two intervals. Sergio, Guillermo, George, do you have anything to add on that for Tyler?
Yes, hello, this is George Angelides with the ISO. Yeah, we have looked into this, specifically the fact that the ramping products like the flexible ramp and in the day-ahead market enhancements, the imbalance reserve is actually straddling intervals because they align with the ramp between the midpoints of two consecutive intervals. And we were looking into incorporating some changes to these formulas for the day-ahead market enhancements with respect to the imbalance reserve product, obviously at some future time, probably in alignment with the DAME rollout, we'll consider making similar changes for consistency to the flexible ramp product based upon what Kelly mentioned earlier. And as Dinesh also mentioned, this is something that we cannot accommodate here for the summer. There is an urgency to have some fix for the summer, making sure that the flexible ramp up product in particular that we procure in large quantities from storage resources is deliverable so that we can rely on this product and satisfy operators' concerns that it will be available. That's our main concern here. This is what we want to accomplish for the summer. And past the summer, we're looking to several other enhancements, including the one that Kelly mentioned, and we'll coordinate all of this before day-ahead market enhancements roll out. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that, George. And I guess just a quick follow-up question that kind of came to mind while you're talking through that is, so FRU, when it's awarded FRU in a given interval, it's not guaranteed is not the right term, I know that, but it's not for certain that that resource would actually start ramping if it's going to be ramped in that interval into the next, right? Sometimes it might be awarded FRU to hold off for ramping in a future interval. So there's
That's
kind of
correct.
like, so there is kind of like a lag difference here, or maybe uncertainty as to when that FRU will actually be converted to energy and impact the state of charge. So
Yeah,
maybe that's
that's
something in the longer term solution we can think about. So okay,
this
I
you can
appreciate.
actually, yeah, thank you, Kelly. This you can actually see in this formula, and that's why the SOC with the superscript AT conveys the idea that it's a different variable from the SOC that you see in the formula above. The SOC without the superscript really tracks down the state of charge based on the energy dispatch of the resource. The SOC with a superscript AT is a variable that looks into the future because it's enforced for every interval. It's an intertemporal constraint, and it looks into having the ability to have sufficient storage going forward, assuming that the flexible ramp up is fully deliverable if it will be fully deployed. So it has the conservative assumption that the flexible ramp up award could be deployed, and making sure that the awards that are for the time horizon, they're deliverable with this assumption that they will be deployed. So it's a conservative way of limiting the flex ramp awards over the time horizon so that we have an outcome with high confidence of the delivery of the flex ramp up product. And that's why this variable is different from the SOC. It really tracks a hypothetical SOC, assuming that the flex ramp product, the up product, is deployed going into the future.
Okay, yeah, but so it's conservative in that it assumes not only it's going to be deployed, but it's going to be deployed in that interval instead of maybe it'll be deployed, in a future interval. Whereas ancillary services, the reg up and reg down, when it's awarded in that interval, it's used in that interval. So there's a slight difference there. So okay, I appreciate that, George. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's go to Don, and then after Don will be Roger.
So Don Trethewey from the California Energy Storage Alliance. I'm glad to hear that we will be looking at the FRP formulation with regards to consistencies with the imbalance reserve formulation. I think the ramp deviation settlement really drives us to making sure that we've got the prices correct for both FRP and imbalance reserves. And then I think I would just make my standard commentary. I think we need to, when we think about the flexible ramping product and imbalance reserves, we need to not fall in the trap that it's the same as as the ancillary services capacity-based product. I view it more like energy than capacity. It's just deferred energy and deferred ramp that you need to use, and you're intending to use it. And in doing these formulations, we need to make sure that we maintain the intent of the FRP prices, which was if I am held out of merit, and if I'm not discharged because you need to hold my ramp out of merit to provide FRU, that the profit I would have earned from being dispatched for energy is basically the price of the flexible ramping product. And so when we do these formulations, I think we need to look at that as that if we don't see that result, then we've undermined what the true opportunity cost is and the full incentive for resources to follow their 5-minute dispatch. So I look forward to the documentation by each market, the various constraints that we're putting on storage, because I think they're enforced differently in each market, and we need more people to understand how that actually works. Thanks.
Thank you, Don.
Okay.
Appreciate the comments. And that documentation is something that is something that we are considering and putting under development.
Okay, we're going to go to our next hand from Roger. Roger, go ahead. You might be on double mute.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Roger Manzano, NV Energy. I just had a quick question. I understand the changes are needed for this summer for deliverability. So will the formula revert back after summer, or does CAISO see this as a more permanent solution until a long-term solution is addressed in the future initiative? I guess along that lines as well, is this something like would you guys be reporting back on after summer how well this actually worked?
Great question, Roger. So at this point in time, this formula would go in place for both summer, but past summer as well, until we can get it addressed in not necessarily a future initiative, because we would also consider, like, this is a topic that we're going to hold in this initiative unless another initiative opens up. So it may be in this venue, it may be in another venue, but Sergio and I are committing to at least have this forum here to continue conversations related to FRP with storage.
Yeah, and if I can add there something quickly, I'd say that, you know, the plan, and we cover this in the future slide, is to have this go in this summer. We will be very, carefully monitoring this inclusion. If there are any unintended outcomes, any oddities, anomalies, we will have the ability to immediately disable this modification if needed. But we will keep track of its impact. We can report back. We'll report back on its impact. But our goal, really, as Dinesh said, would be to put it in this summer, and then provided that everything works exactly as we intend to and the testing reveals, retain it as we have the conversations on how to expand and extend the application of other constraints, such as the envelope equations. So, we'll be monitoring this and reporting back, and if any issues arise, the ISO will have the ability to very quickly address that by disabling the modification.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay, Dinesh, there's no other hands.
Great, thank you, Yelena. Okay, moving on to testing. So so testing that we're doing is looking at previous intervals and then running a counterfactual to see whether or not this modification would have worked or made some sort of impact. Now, often the FRU price is either 0 or near 0, right? So targeting the testing in specific intervals, specifically looking at last summer or the summer before, is covering when this modification would be useful for both the market and operations more broadly. So in this example, this resource had an SOC min of 1 megawatt hour. And for simplicity, we're assuming here that there's no regulation up or regulation down that is impacting SOC as well. In the yellow, those yellow columns are the status quo. So this is what did happen, and then the green is the proposed modification. So that's the counterfactual with the formula as listed on the fourth bullet there, with that in place. So when looking back at last July, under the status quo, that award was given to the resource, but it was undeliverable because there was no SOC to support that award, right? Due to that energy award at 1730, right? If the proposed modification was active and we're being mindful of the limited SOC of this resource, the FRP award going into the hour starting at 1700 would have been 0, right? And, you know, that optimization sees that energy award coming and then says there's not enough state of charge for both FRU and for that energy award. And energy and FRU are in megawatts, SOC is in megawatt hours. And then taking a step back and looking at the system level for these specific intervals. So the last 5 intervals are reported below here from a system level. These are the ones where we're seeing some of that impact. And then the counterfactual, right, this increase in price, and specifically even looking at the interval of 1700, where the price goes from 0 to 347, right? It leads to 16 extra fast start units being committed, right? And these are not necessarily storage units, right? These are oftentimes other resources that could have provided that flexible ramping product needed if they had been given the time to prepare for that award. Okay, so some of the takeaways from the testing we've done so far. The proposed modification works. It mitigates infeasible flexible ramp-up awards to storage resources, and it resolves the concerns that the ISO have had regarding market efficiency and reliability. It also bolsters that price formation, aiding the market in identifying additional resources to cover flexible ramp-up. So enhanced testing will continue before our final deployment. And as Sergio had mentioned, if deployed, we will be monitoring the modification's effects. And if unintended consequences arise, we have the ability to immediately disable the modification. Questions on testing?
We just got a hand from Callie.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. A couple quick questions for you. So as you guys continue to test, is there going to be a forum for you guys to review those test results with stakeholders? Because I know when we were going through the testing process for the attenuation factors, that's when, you know, one of the issues was raised. And so we kind of held off and reworked that one before implementing.
Thank you, Callie. And to be clear, when you're asking about continued forum, is that something that you're envisioning as testing before before final deployment, or is this for monitoring post final deployment?
Before deployment. If
Deployment.
there's going to be like a stakeholder meeting to review the results.
Yeah, so I think in some ways these are the results that we have. I mean, these results are showing that this is working. So this is a review of those testing results. If there is something that comes up that we deem as something that is material enough to share with stakeholders, we're happy to do so at our May 28th meeting. And you know, this will be the forum that the Storage Design and Modeling Initiative will be the forum where we'll continue discussions about this. Does that answer your question?
It does, yep. And then back on your testing results slide, you have a bullet there that, because to be honest, something that kind of confused me a little bit, back where you have that table with like the yellow columns and the green columns.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I think you said that the first 2 intervals of FRU is not optimizable. So does that explain why in the green column you still have 2 intervals of 80 megawatts of FRU being awarded? And then I guess my second question is, what do you mean by not optimizable?
That's correct. George, do you have thoughts on this?
Kelly, can you repeat your question, please?
Yeah, so I just the third bullet at the very end just says the first two intervals FRU is not optimizable. So I'm trying to understand what is meant by that and figure out if that's why in the green columns you still have two intervals of 80 megawatts of FRU being awarded.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the specific example here with the data, but from this comment, I will assume that it's coming from the 15-minute market. And in the 15-minute market, we have the first interval being the buffer, and then the second interval being the binding interval. And we don't dispatch the awards for the binding interval. They're reserved for use in the RTD that comes next to it. So I think that's where the third bullet points out that there's no optimization for the flexible ramp award for the first two intervals in the FMM. They're inherited from the previous FMM run. So the optimization, the procurement for the flexible ramp award is starting from the first advisory interval going forward. And that's the same case also for RTD, but in RTD we don't have a buffer. So it's only one interval, the binding, that the FRU is not optimized. It's actually released at that point. So we don't procure anything. It comes from the previous RTD. And you only procure the product for the first advisory interval. So it's the ramp from the binding to the first advisory and then onward until the end of the time horizon. So that's where this comment is pointing out. Is that providing some clarity here?
Yes, that does. Thank you. So are these 7 intervals? Yeah, 7 intervals you're showing. Is this one horizon run to where it's not like you have the binding interval first and then the rest of these results are advisory?
I'm assuming, because I'm looking at the start time, that it's 1815, 1830. These are the various FMM runs. So it's the same. The number of intervals in each run changes, but your focus should always be the first advisory. That's the binding procurement for the flexible ramp up award, and that's where the price is produced to settle it. So the first two, you can ignore them. So when it shows here the FRU in the status quo and in the proposed modification columns, I have to assume that it's for the first advisory, which is actually the binding award. Sorry for that third bullet. This really doesn't provide much understanding here by saying that the first two intervals are fixed. The focus is always the one that is binding for the product, and that's the first advisory when it comes to flexible ramp up.
No,
So
I appreciate that. I'm just trying to figure out if all of these rows are advisory except for the one, or if these are all results from the binding interval run.
My assumption, and maybe my colleagues who are behind producing the results can verify, is that what you see as FRU and FRU LMP in all these rows is the first advisory interval, because that's the one that we settle and the one that is financially binding.
Perfect. I wasn't sure if these results were from one market run that included this horizon. No, that helps. Thanks, George.
Kelly, let me add on that. What you are seeing here is one single market run that is composed of 7 intervals in the horizon. The first interval is the buffer, the second interval is the binding for energy, the third interval is the first advisory that happens to be the binding for FRP. This is not every single binding interval in a period. This is just one single market run.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I stand corrected.
That's okay. I appreciate that clarification. Is there, Evan, I'm not asking this right now, obviously, but maybe at the next meeting, if we can see what would actually be the binding results for this resource, because obviously that's, at the end of the day, that's what matters from the resource perspective. So, okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, Kelly, let me follow up on that, because this table is showing that. It's showing that and every other interval. So if you look at the third interval, that is the first advisory that has start time of 1845, that happens to be the one that is binding for FRP.
Yes, that one row. Correct. Yeah, I'm just asking if when you guys are doing the testings and you're showing multiple intervals in a row, if we can see what's binding in all the intervals.
Okay, so you expect to see a progression over time for the binding.
It would be nice to see the binding across the entire horizon, yeah, not just the one row that's binding.
Okay, thank you.
No, good. Thank you, Kelly. We'll take that back and discuss.
Our next hand is from Don.
Well, you answered my original question in response to Callie, but this actually brings up something I think we need to think through. Is I think in the buffer interval and the first 15-minute interval in this single market horizon, FMM horizon, the energy schedules are not fixed. They can move around. And will this have the similar impact to what we saw with the ancillary services state of charge constraint, where it drove energy schedules to hold, AS requirements, and then we had to exempt all of that from potentially bid cost recovery a couple years ago. So I think it'd be very interesting to see what the impact is to all of the products and the prices associated with them. And I think, again, this further illustrates why we need to understand how all the various constraints are enforced in each market, because, the FMM is a perfect example, where in that buffer interval, certain variables are held fixed and others can move. And in RTD, certain variables can move, like ancillary services can't move, but other variables can. We need to understand what those mean.
Understood. John, just to clarify, we are not changing anything of that framework, right? That is still in place as of now. The modification we are targeting is for the implication of FRU, not about the buffer or the first binding, the first advisory. That is already before and after the change.
Yeah, no, Guillermo, I totally agree with it, but I think it gets back to my point that we need to look at the entire formulation in each of the markets to see how these SOC impacts are impacting the awards of all of the various products. And it's, like I said, it's different. The way it's going to be done in the IFM is different than the way it's going to be done in RUC, and different the way that it's done in FMM, and different than the way it's done in RTD. And so we've been just simply looking at constraints and say, here's how we formulated the constraints, but they're enforced completely different in each of the market runs. And we just need to, I think collectively, we do a better job in terms of understanding when we make these changes, where it can impact. If we looked at the problems, that way, versus let's just make one change to one constraint, we'll go test it and see how it works. To me, we already had the discussion on how does the telemetry values impact these formulations. One thing I've always been struggling with is why at some point wouldn't the ancillary services state of charge constraint bind and stop awarding FRU? It might have been later than we would have wanted, but at some point it should stop it. But for some reason, I'm not sure why it didn't, but that's because we're not looking at all of them in aggregate to see how they're working together.
Noted. Thank you very much for your feedback there, Don.
We have a hand from Alva.
Yeah, just to follow up, one other area of curiosity would be to see what how this is affecting the target state of charge. If a market participant sets a target state of charge, how the flexible ramping is, what the priority of that is versus the energy that is generally there's a ancillary services take priority over energy in meeting a target state of charge constraint, but I don't know what the effect will be of this FRU. Essentially, there's projected limit or projected procurement over the horizon on the target state of charge constraint.
Thank you, Alva. Sergio, Guillermo, George, any immediate responses? Otherwise, we'll take that question offline. Okay.
We need to
Thank you very
understand a little bit the question, Alva. Are you referring to the potential um, relaxation penalty for these constraints and how they stack to each other? I'm not sure I understood your question.
It was just curiosity raised by what Don was saying, that basically the target state of charge currently comes into in a certain ordering in terms of how it's enforced in the real-time optimization. If you have a constraint that you have to be at a certain state of charge at the end of the hour, that will not be observed if it would cause the like the ancillary service state of charge constraint to be violated, as I understand it. So really, just
I see.
This is
So
like brainstorming. I'm not. I just
no,
heard
I understand.
what Don said, and I'm just wondering. That's all.
Yeah, your question is how do all these products interrelate in the optimization? So of course in FMM we procure ancillary services too, so everything's co-optimized. So all the commodities are co-optimized: energy, flexible ramp, ancillary services. So if you have a terminal constraint to meet at an SOC, like SOC at the end of hour, all of them are co-optimized to meet that constraint. RTD obviously does not co-optimize the ancillary services; they're fixed. So only energy and flexible ramp are co-optimized. So it really depends on the economics on how the outcome comes about. I can't really give you a more satisfactory answer to this. Everything is co-optimized in having all these constraints simultaneously enforced.
Yeah, I'm sort of. I'm just. I'll have to think about it a little bit more. It just seems like there's some possible unexpected effects of having as Don brought up, the ASSOC constraint is also going to have some effect here. And if all of these simply limit more the procurement of flexible ramp up, which is probably the result, then I don't think that's a bad outcome. Basically you just have more constraints that keep you from procuring undeliverable FRU. But if by some twist of reasoning, the FRU procurement and its effect on the SOC constraint causes unexpected results on other products, we'd probably want to keep a very close eye on that.
Yeah, I understand. So yeah, the FRU is the target here, as you mentioned. We're enforcing this constraint to limit the procurement of FRU in the time horizon to make sure it's feasible, having this conservative constraint in place. But there's of course interaction between the commodities through other constraints, and the FRU also has a demand curve, so it doesn't have a penalty for meeting the requirement as the ancillary services have. So I find it difficult to see how limiting the FRU will have an impact on not being able to procure ancillary services and meet our requirement. They're a higher quality product, and on this procurement constraints we have penalties for relaxing them, whereas the FRU has the demand curve that makes it more elastic. That's what I can offer at this point, thinking on top of my head.
Thanks, George.
Okay, we have no other hands at this time.
Great, thank you. Okay, so moving on to summarizing some of the stakeholder discussion that's happened so far. So PG&E has helpfully submitted comments on the BPM, proposed BPM modification, that PRR 1627, and those comments become public as soon as the ISO approves them. So PG&E has suggested that as has been discussed so far, concerns about I think as Alva put, a cascading of FRU procurement rather than a reversing and reprocuring in each real-time interval. And also with the caveat that this may not have significant adverse effects due to large amounts of storage FRU capability, and also that reinitialization of SOC telemetry that Don had also asked a question about in terms of how often that is occurring. Now, the request from PG&E was that we monitor to ensure needed flexibility is not overly constrained under specifically stressed conditions, and the ISO emphasizes that that the deliverability of this product is paramount here, right? So whether that is deliverability from storage resources, whether that's deliverability from other resources, the concern is whatever is being awarded can be delivered upon. And we're happy to commit to that suggested monitoring. It's entirely reasonable and something that we will do moving forward, assuming that there's final implementation and deployment of this proposed change. So a couple other comments from the last stakeholder meeting on the 14th of April. So some stakeholders had suggested that the proposal may mix upward and downward capacity products where an additional downward award may make room for that upward award. So this is tying into that question that was coming from Eric earlier in the conversation, where adding FRD to the formula as well as FRU would negate the benefit because the awards may offset each other, right? So an FRU and an FRD then offsetting would create the situation where it actually doesn't do anything in terms of what we're looking to solve. So in our testing, we've seen that this proposal does not materially impact FRD procurement and pricing. Given the current status quo around FRD, having this one-sided rather than balanced on both sides inclusion of FRU into SOC did not materially impact what is currently happening. In terms of looking long-term to resolve, the ISO, as Sergio had mentioned, currently favors expanding those envelope equations to real-time use to the FRP and when in consideration of state of charge. This requires implementation of day-ahead market enhancements first, the DAME development that's currently occurring, and also we'd like to have we would like to have a full stakeholder process to discuss and design those envelope equation enhancements before it goes forward. So that is something that, whether it happens in this form, whether it happens elsewhere, this is something that we'd like to do. Given resource constraints, in summary, given resource constraints at this time, the ISO believes that the most prudent solution is to add this FRU term to the SOC formula here. And beyond summer, we agree that reflecting the effects of both FRU and FRD would be a cleaner, more material improvement than the current proposed revision request that is moving forward in testing and hopefully towards deployment. Okay. Eric, I see you have your question up. Thanks for holding for a little bit. I hope that answered your question. If not, feel free to go ahead and ask.
Well, it does and it doesn't. Sorry, this is Eric Little from CalCCA. I understand why you excluded it because of the offsetting effect, but it just draws the question of then for FRU, why are you considering the entire capacity? Because in one space you acknowledge that you can't dispatch all of both of them, but then in another space you're saying, I'm going to assume that I dispatch all of the FRU in this formulation.
So I think the reframe of that is that we would, for FRU, we would like for it to be deliverable, right, in all circumstances. And if it's, there are other places that we can procure FRU besides storage resources, but we cannot procure it if it's not delivered, if in the last moment we realize it's undeliverable after it's been awarded, right? So
Is this the same not
I
true
think
of
this
down?
ties into the. Wait, sorry, I missed that, Eric.
I'm sorry. Finish your thought. I apologize.
Okay. So what that means in terms of flexible ramp up is that we are, I think as Alvaro put it, right, we are looking to be a bit conservative because we want to make sure that this product works, right, and is deliverable when we need it. What was the other thing you were asking about, Eric?
Well, I was wondering, you said something about the FRU that if you couldn't get it, but isn't that true of FRD as well?
So with FRD, it's what you're asking the resource to do. So for FRU, we're asking for more energy, right, to help assist that ramp. For FRD, we're looking for a D rate, right? So from an operational reliability standpoint, the ISO sees that the concerns around FRD, it's easier to derate than it is to sort of ask for more energy from resources, especially given some of our renewable resources and our existing fleet. I think that is that's the crux of it. Why the FRU is a bit trickier in terms of looking at the summer and saying, do we have enough flexible ramp going upwards rather than downwards? Did that answer your question?
Okay, so it's because it's a summer issue essentially, and I get that. That's your immediate concern. One final question, I guess, and maybe this gets to the questions you had earlier about the binding interval. Can you guys describe what happens if you assume you're going to use all the flex ramp up and then don't? When does that get corrected through the process to show that the state of charge has not been used?
Oh, I can answer that. This is George Angelidis with you. So as I mentioned earlier, this is an intertemporal constraint that is enforced for all ramps in the current run, and also it continues to be enforced in the future runs. So it adjusts every time you have the application running. So the funnel, the SOC-AT, the conventional constraint that constrains the procurement of flex ramp up in the current run changed from the previous run, and the values carry over. So if the flexible ramp up hasn't been deployed as energy, you can see that in the same formula there are energy quantities. So it allows for additional procurement of the flexible ramp up if in that run, if the procurement didn't happen in the previous run, if the deployment did not happen in the previous run. So it sort of adjusts every time the application runs. So it's looking forward and adjusts as it goes. So you have the ability to limit it in the current run based on this conservative assumption, but this assumption is reevaluated every time it is enforced again in the next run, right?
Okay, I appreciate that, and sorry, I'm not trying to advocate anything here. I'm just trying to understand exactly what happened. So sorry, I think I said that was the final question, but I keep coming up with more. If that's the case, then you have the attenuation factor for reg up, which basically says how much do I expect to use it for, rather than its full amount of capacity that's put in. It sounds like what you're saying is you could do that for flex ramp up, but you're being more conservative by using the entire amount of flex ramp up and effectively assuming that the attenuation factor is 1, that you are definitely going to use it, and then allowing the next run to update that if you don't, rather than assuming that it's maybe a lower amount, and if it's higher, allowing the next run to update that. Is that correct?
Yes, our initial assumption here in this conservative formulation for the constraint is the attenuation factor for the flexible ramp up to be unity. Essentially, we're gunning for the most conservative outlook, considering that flexible ramp up is majorly provided by storage resources. And we'll be monitoring this, of course, when we put it in production. We'll be looking for it, and if there is a reason out of our observations to suggest and justify potentially something different than one, we'll always be revisiting this. But we want to start this summer with the most conservative alternative that we have for the flexible ramp-up procurement.
Okay, George.
Thanks, Eric. We have a hand from Don, and then we have Callie.
Don Trethewey, California Energy Storage Alliance. I think I have a little bit of this different perspective than Eric with regards to the appropriate attenuation factor. And it goes back to my original comments that when we think about flexible ramping product, we think about imbalance reserves. Those are really more like energy than a capacity product. And we want to get the correct energy FRP opportunity costs calculated, as I mentioned earlier. And so, and then one area where let me add that's why I think in looking at the day-ahead market enhancements envelopes and assuming an 85% attenuation factor for imbalance reserves, that may undermine the actual pricing that we're looking for. And so I would hope as part of the analysis that's being done with regards to those configurable parameters that we look at the pricing impacts to see if we're not undermining the calculation of true opportunity costs. And then my last comment is, or question, can you clarify when we would be looking to reviewing envelope equations to be implemented in the real-time market for FRP?
I think you know this, Don. That is something that we don't have an answer for at this time. When we can, but we'll let you know as soon as we can get there. Thank you very much for your feedback on the other topics noted, and we'll be taking that into consideration.
I think it actually has to be implemented the same time as the day-ahead market enhancements. One of the things that the day-ahead market enhancements introduces is a ramp deviation settlement between imbalance reserves and the flexible ramping product in the 15-minute market. And so I don't think we would want to have pricing anomalies remain when we start now having a deviation settlement.
Thank you very much, Don.
We've got a hand from Callie, and then after that, we have Outlook.
Yeah, hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. I'll be very brief on this one. So first, similar to Don, I was wondering if the CAISO is looking at envelope equations for FRU and FRD at some point, instead of jumping into that conversations on how do we change them or enhance them compared to what's going into place in DAME, can we first have a review on that? It's been quite some time since I think we've seen the envelope equations and walked through that. So that refresher would be extremely useful at some point in time in this policy conversation. And then I guess my second comment is I really appreciate you guys acknowledging that this is not a long-term durable solution. I think the minute you add FRD into that equation, which is I think the natural thing to think of next is, oh, let's expand this to FRD. Let's just simply add that to the equation. I think that's when you're going to start getting the market awarding FRU and FRD to support regulation awards, which I think you're going to get some major reliability issues. So I appreciate you guys kind of acknowledging that for a long-term solution, we might need to pivot to something else. So if it is the envelope equations, again, a refresher would be greatly appreciated. Thanks.
Appreciate that, Callie. Yes, we're happy to provide that review of envelope equations prior to any major stakeholder discussion around sort of potentially using those for the flexible ramping awards here.
Yeah, prior to DAME implementation. I would say prior to DAME implementation would actually also be extremely useful, so we can remind ourselves what that's going to look like.
Noted. Okay.
Great, thanks. Let's go to Elva.
Thank you. And very quickly, because you're at time, but just on Don's question about attenuation factors on imbalance reserves, I would say there's a difference because the imbalance reserves are not being released in the same way that they automatically sort of inherently get released in the real-time market by the refresh of the telemetry. So there is a concern with essentially the services getting locked up over the course of the 24-hour optimization horizon that is different from what happens in real time. So just something worth thinking about. Also, I think the deviation settlement for between flexible ramping and imbalance reserves has to do with flexible ramping that gets awarded and sort of replaces imbalance reserves. So these constraints, if they're going to reduce flexible ramping awards, probably wouldn't lead to those kinds of deviation settlements, but just thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin.
All right, thanks. Thank you for your presentation, Dinesh, and thank you, Sergio. Do you have anything else to wrap up before I go over next steps?
I think you're going to take us home here, Yelena. Thank you very much for being here.
All right. Okay, so for our upcoming milestones, as we mentioned, for that 414 SSE Management Capacity Awards topic, separate from the BPM comments through the BPM PRR process, we have this on our initiative page, and those comments are due on the 13th, next Tuesday. And then on the 23rd, we have the comments due for today's meeting and the issue paper and straw proposal and the discussion today. We'll have that comment and template posted later today for your review. And then we are targeting 526 for the discussion paper on the distribution level paired resources posting. And then our next stakeholder meeting is on the 28th on Uplift and Dub and SOC management topics. For reference, here is the links. If you have any questions, you can email us at isostakeholderaffairs@kaiso.com. This week is over, so there's not really a lot to look at here, but this is just for your involvement in ISO meetings. And just a plug for our Energy Matters blog for insights into the ISO grid and market operations. You can be on the lookout for this. I think there's even been a new blog posted since this slide was created. Thank you so much for your participation and for such a good discussion today. And we look forward to your comments. Have a good Friday.